The bustling airport was alive with chatter, rolling suitcases, and hurried footsteps. Naomi clutched her infant son against her chest, adjusting the baby's small blanket as she walked toward the boarding gate. Her eyes looked tired, but her face radiated a quiet strength. She was used to stares. She had endured them all her life. But traveling with a newborn added another layer of vulnerability. She checked her boarding pass again, relieved that she had managed to get a business-class seat. Traveling alone with a baby wasn't easy, and she had saved up frequent flyer miles for this trip. As she approached the counter, the flight attendant, Clara, gave her a long look, one of those sharp glances that wasn't outright hostile, but carried hidden judgment. "Business class?" Clara asked, her tone more skeptical than professional. "Yes," Naomi replied softly, handing over her ticket. Clara sighed as if inconvenienced. "Fine. Go ahead." She handed the ticket back without so much as a smile. Naomi ignored it and walked down the jet bridge. Once on board, she carefully placed her diaper bag in the overhead compartment and settled into her seat. Her baby whimpered, unsettled by the new environment. Naomi kissed his forehead, whispering, "It's okay, sweet boy. Mommy's here." Other passengers were boarding too. Businessmen with laptops, women with designer bags, and couples whispering to each other. Some smiled kindly at Naomi when they saw her infant, while others gave that familiar look of annoyance, an unspoken prayer that the baby wouldn't cry the entire flight. The hum of activity calmed slightly as the cabin filled. Naomi rocked her son, hoping he would fall asleep before takeoff. Just when things seemed steady, Clara walked down the aisle checking seatbelts. She stopped at Naomi's row. "You really think it's a good idea to travel with such a young child?" she asked loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Naomi kept her composure. "He'll be fine. I know how to care for him." Clara smirked. "We'll see. Just don't disturb everyone else." She moved on, her words leaving a sting behind. Naomi swallowed the lump in her throat, brushing her baby's soft hair to calm herself. The engines roared, the plane lifted, and for a moment Naomi allowed herself to breathe. The baby whimpered, startled by the sudden ascent, and Naomi whispered soothingly. But halfway through the climb, the baby began to cry in earnest. His small wails filled the cabin. Naomi gently rocked him, quietly humming a lullaby. Clara's sharp eyes caught the sound immediately. She stormed down the aisle, her heels clicking against the floor, and leaned close. "You need to control that baby," she hissed. "People paid good money to sit here. They don't want to listen to crying." Naomi's heart raced, but she kept her tone calm. "He's a baby. He's frightened. I'm doing everything I can." Clara rolled her eyes. "Maybe you should have thought about that before buying a business-class ticket." Passengers nearby shifted uncomfortably. A man whispered to his wife, "That's not right." Another woman frowned at Clara's words but said nothing. Naomi lowered her eyes, whispering to her baby, "Shh, it's okay." She tried to shut out the judgment pressing in on her from every direction, but Clara wasn't finished. Moments later, as the crying continued, Clara snapped. She leaned down, slammed Naomi's tray table shut, and with shocking aggression, struck Naomi across the face with the back of her hand, while Naomi was still holding her child. Gasps filled the cabin. A collective disbelief rippled through the passengers. A young man in the next row immediately pulled out his phone, recording. A mother in the row ahead turned around, horrified. "Did she just—" Naomi froze. The sting burned across her cheek, her baby screaming louder from the sudden jolt. She clutched him tighter, her arms trembling, her eyes glistening with tears. But she didn't scream. She didn't fight back. She simply whispered in disbelief, "You just hit me while I'm holding my child." The head attendant rushed down the aisle, pale with panic. "Clara, what have you done?" Clara folded her arms defiantly. "I did what was necessary. She's disturbing everyone. Some people don't belong in business class anyway." Her words dripped with venom, echoing across the cabin. The passengers erupted in whispers. "Did she really say that? This is unbelievable." Phones were now recording from multiple angles. An elderly woman leaned across the aisle, gently touching Naomi's arm. "Darling, don't you worry. The truth will come out. We all saw what happened." Naomi's cheek throbbed, but her dignity remained intact. She kissed her baby's forehead, whispering soothing words, though her own heart ached. She felt the sting of not just the slap, but the humiliation of being judged, dismissed, because of who she was and what she looked like. Then, from the front of the cabin, the VIP lounge door opened. A tall man stepped out, dressed simply but with a presence that commanded the room. His face was familiar to some of the passengers, and a ripple of recognition passed through the crowd. He walked directly toward Naomi's row, his steps calm, his eyes focused. Naomi looked up, and relief flooded her eyes. "Are you all right, love?" the man asked gently, his voice warm but laced with concern. The cabin fell silent. Whispers began. "Love? Is that her husband?" Clara's eyes widened in confusion. "Wait, you know her?" Naomi looked directly at Clara, her voice steady despite her trembling hands. "He's my husband." The man turned, his protective arm resting on Naomi's shoulder as he faced Clara. His voice dropped into a tone of steel. "And by the way, I own this airline." The silence was deafening. Clara's confidence crumbled in an instant. Her face drained of color, her mouth opening and closing with no words coming out. Passengers gasped, some clapping softly at the revelation. Naomi held her baby close, her dignity intact, as the tide of the flight began to shift in her favor. The cabin was frozen in disbelief. For a moment, no one moved. Clara's smug superiority drained away as the realization sank in. The man standing before her wasn't just another passenger. He was the owner of the very airline whose uniform she wore. David's tall frame leaned ever so slightly toward her. His calm voice carried the weight of thunder. "You struck my wife while she was holding our child. Do you understand the gravity of what you've done?" Clara stammered, her face pale. Sir, I was only trying to maintain order. The baby was crying, and she was disrupting passengers." "Enough," David interrupted sharply, his voice echoing down the aisle. His piercing eyes locked on her. "A crying baby is not a disruption. It's a child. What you did was not enforcement of rules. It was cruelty. And cruelty has no place in my airline." The passengers began to murmur in agreement. A man in a business suit stood up. "Sir, with all respect, I witnessed everything. This woman didn't just overstep. She assaulted a mother in front of us all." "Yes," another passenger added, raising her phone. "I recorded it. I have proof." Several others raised their hands, confirming they too had captured the shocking scene. Clara's face flushed crimson as beads of sweat formed on her forehead. She realized the tide had turned against her. No excuse, no deflection could shield her now. Naomi sat silently, her baby nestled against her chest. Her cheek still burned from the slap, but inside her heart pounded with conflicting emotions. Fear, humiliation, and now a spark of something else. Justice. She had lived a life of endurance, biting her tongue when people judged her for being a black woman married to a wealthy man. She had grown used to whispers behind her back, cold stares in first-class lounges, and assumptions that she didn't belong. But never, never had the prejudice been so violent and so public. David knelt beside Naomi, lowering his tone so only she could hear. "I'm so sorry I wasn't here sooner. I should have protected you." Tears welled in Naomi's eyes, but she shook her head. "You're here now. That's what matters." He kissed her forehead tenderly, his hand brushing away her tears. Passengers nearby, who had been watching silently, found themselves moved by the intimacy of the moment. Some even wiped their own eyes. But David wasn't finished. He rose again, his towering presence turning back toward Clara. "You will hand over your badge and credentials immediately," he ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. Clara's hands trembled as she fumbled with the lanyard around her neck. She tried one last plea. "Please, sir, this is my career. I didn't mean—" "You didn't mean," David's voice thundered. "You didn't mean to slap a mother holding a child. You didn't mean to shame her in front of an entire cabin. No. You meant every word, every action. And now, you will live with the consequences." The head attendant, who had been silent until now, stepped forward. "Mr. Lawson, sir, we'll remove her from duty immediately. Please, allow me to escort her to the crew rest area until we land." David gave a curt nod. "Do it." Passengers erupted in applause as Clara, pale and trembling, was escorted down the aisle. Some clapped loudly. Others muttered, "Serves her right." A teenage girl whispered to her mother, "She deserved that." Naomi's heart, though bruised, lifted slightly at the sight of solidarity. For once, the whispers weren't against her. They were for her. As the noise died down, David turned back to Naomi, sitting beside her now, his arm protectively around her shoulders. He looked at his son, who had finally calmed, blinking curiously at the world around him. "He's strong," David whispered. "Just like his mother." Naomi smiled faintly, her eyes glistening. "I've had to be." Her words carried a deeper meaning. And suddenly, as the hum of the plane softened into the background, Naomi was pulled into memories of her past, moments that explained why strength had become her constant companion. She remembered being a little girl, walking into her first private school, surrounded by children who didn't look like her. The stares, the whispers, the teacher who assumed she was in the wrong classroom. She remembered being older, walking hand in hand with David in public, and hearing strangers mutter under their breath, "Gold digger. She doesn't fit with him." She remembered nights lying awake, wondering if she was strong enough to keep living under society's microscope. But every time doubt threatened to drown her, she would tell herself the same thing. You belong here. You are worthy. And one day they'll see it. Now, sitting on this plane, with strangers watching her dignity shine even in the face of cruelty, Naomi realized. This was that day. David gently took her hand. "Do you remember the first time you flew with me?" he asked softly, trying to shift her focus. Naomi smiled faintly at the memory. "Yes, I was so nervous. I didn't know how to act in first class. I felt like everyone was staring." "They were," David admitted with a small laugh. "But not because you didn't belong. Because you lit up the room." Naomi chuckled through her tears, leaning her head on his shoulder. His words wrapped around her like a shield. As the plane sailed through the sky, the energy in the cabin changed. Passengers who had initially judged Naomi now looked at her with respect, admiration even. The elderly woman across the aisle smiled warmly at her. The businessman who had spoken up earlier leaned over. "Ma'am, if you ever need anything, support, testimony, whatever, you have all of us as witnesses." Naomi's heart swelled. For once, she wasn't alone in her fight. But she didn't know that this was just the beginning. Clara might have been removed from her post, but the storm wasn't over. There were whispers among some passengers, whispers Naomi couldn't quite hear, that hinted at something more, something darker. And David, though calm on the surface, felt it too. He squeezed Naomi's hand firmly. He had built an empire of airplanes, wealth, and prestige. But right now, none of that mattered. The only thing that mattered was protecting the two people who meant everything to him: his wife and child. And as the plane pushed forward into the clouds, David silently vowed no one would ever humiliate Naomi again. The rest of the flight settled into an uneasy calm, but beneath the quiet, emotions churned like turbulence. Passengers spoke in hushed tones, phones still in hand, replaying the shocking slap over and over. Every so often, eyes darted toward Naomi, not with judgment anymore, but with sympathy, even admiration. Naomi sat still, her baby now asleep against her chest, but her mind refused to rest. Her cheek still tingled from where Clara's hand had landed, the sting lingering not just on her skin, but deep inside her soul. She thought of all the times she had faced prejudice in silence, swallowing her pain to keep the peace. But this time had been different. This time, she hadn't been alone. David's arm was still wrapped around her, his steady presence radiating strength. His gaze was fixed ahead, but Naomi could see the storm behind his calm expression. She knew that when David grew quiet like this, he was planning, strategizing, and she knew that Clara's nightmare had only just begun. Up in the crew rest area, Clara sat on a small fold-down seat, her chest rising and falling rapidly. Her mind spun with panic. She had just struck the wife of the airline's owner. How could she have been so reckless? But beneath her fear, another emotion festered: resentment. "She doesn't belong here," Clara muttered under her breath. "I've worked for years to climb the ranks, and she waltzes in with a baby and a rich husband, acting like she owns the world. She doesn't deserve him, or this life." She dug her nails into her palms, the sting grounding her fury. Clara had grown up believing in hierarchy. People like her were meant to serve, but with dignity, with respect. Yet in her eyes, Naomi represented everything that felt unfair: beauty, love, wealth, and power, all wrapped into one. Clara had convinced herself Naomi must have manipulated her way into it. That slap. She told herself it hadn't been cruelty. It had been justice. But the recording passengers now held said otherwise. Back in the cabin, the murmurs grew louder. The businessman who had spoken up leaned toward David. "Sir, forgive me, but if I may advise, this video, it's going to spread. Someone has already uploaded it to social media." David's brows furrowed. "Already?" "Yes, and it's gaining traction. People are outraged. They're calling for accountability." Naomi's stomach twisted. "David, I don't want the world to see me like this. Broken. Humiliated." David turned to her, his voice low but unshakable. "No, Naomi. The world won't see you broken. They'll see you as you are, brave, graceful, a mother who endured cruelty with dignity. This video isn't a stain on you. It's a mirror exposing the ugliness of prejudice. Naomi closed her eyes, letting his words sink in, but doubt still lingered. She had never asked for attention, never wanted to be the face of a fight she hadn't chosen. She only wanted peace for herself and her family. Suddenly, a gentle voice interrupted her thoughts. The elderly woman across the aisle leaned forward, her eyes kind. "My dear, I know this must feel unbearable, but you should know. Your strength just gave a lesson to everyone on this plane, especially me." Naomi blinked, caught off guard. "A lesson?" The woman nodded. "Yes. I have a daughter your age. She married outside our race, and I wasn't kind about it. Watching you today, I realized I was wrong. I saw the love between you and your husband, the way you held your child, the way you carried yourself with grace even when insulted. I was ashamed of my thoughts. You reminded me what matters. Love, humanity, not skin color." Naomi's throat tightened, her heart swelling with both relief and sorrow. For so long she had felt like every glance was a judgment. Now, for the first time, a stranger's glance felt like an embrace. David squeezed her hand gently, as if to say, "See? This is why you're stronger than you know." Hours later, as the plane began its descent, the tension in the air thickened once more. Passengers whispered about what would happen when they landed. Would Clara be arrested? Would there be a public scandal? David leaned close to Naomi. "Listen to me, love. When we land, things will get loud. Reporters may be waiting. The video is already making headlines. But remember, this is not your shame to carry. It's hers." Naomi swallowed hard, her nerves rattling. "I don't want them to see our baby like this." "I'll shield you both," David promised firmly. As the wheels touched down and the plane taxied to the gate, the head attendant approached David cautiously. "Sir, airport security is already aware of the incident. They're waiting outside the jet bridge. How would you like to proceed?" David's jaw tightened. "Clara will be escorted off immediately, and I'll be speaking with the press myself." Naomi's eyes widened. "David, are you sure?" "Yes," he said, his voice calm but resolute. "This isn't just about us anymore. It's about every woman, every mother, every person who has been silenced or mistreated because of how they look or who they are. Clara thought she could humiliate you. Instead, she revealed the truth about herself, and I'll make sure the world knows it." The plane came to a halt, and the seatbelt sign dinged off. Passengers rose, but no one rushed for the exit. Everyone seemed to sense that the real climax of this journey was yet to come. Security officers stepped on board, their presence commanding. Clara was brought down the aisle, her hands shaking, her eyes darting nervously. Some passengers booed, others filmed. Clara's lips trembled as she spotted Naomi holding her baby, calm and dignified despite everything. For the first time, Clara looked small, powerless, exposed. Naomi met her eyes, not with hatred, but with quiet strength. And in that moment, Clara realized what true dignity looked like. It wasn't in uniforms or authority or false superiority. It was in Naomi, the woman she had tried to humiliate, but who now stood taller than her in every way. As Clara was escorted off, David stood, addressing the passengers. "Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your patience during this difficult flight. I want you to know this. No act of cruelty, prejudice, or abuse of power will ever be tolerated in my airline. What happened today is unacceptable. and change will come of it. The cabin filled with applause. Some passengers cheered. Others wept quietly. Naomi sat, overwhelmed, her heart pounding, her baby stirring against her chest. But deep inside, she knew this wasn't the end of the story. The world outside that door was waiting. And once they stepped off this plane, life as they knew it would never be the same again. The cabin doors opened, and the air outside felt heavy with anticipation. Passengers filed out slowly, some stopping to whisper words of encouragement to Naomi as they passed. A few even paused to thank David directly, shaking his hand or giving him a nod of respect. Naomi clutched her baby tightly, her chest rising and falling as though she were preparing for battle. She had thought the slap had been the most humiliating moment of her life, but stepping into the unknown, with cameras waiting and voices ready to twist her story, terrified her even more.
"Stay close to me," David murmured, placing a protective arm around her. "No one will touch you. Not while I'm here." As they stepped off the jet bridge into the terminal, the scene erupted. Bright camera flashes lit up the corridor like lightning. Microphones extended from every angle, reporters shouting questions over one another. "Mrs. Walker, how do you feel about being assaulted on the flight?" "David, is it true your wife was slapped in front of the whole plane?" "Do you plan to press charges against the flight attendant?" "Naomi, do you think this was racially motivated?" The noise pressed in, overwhelming. Naomi's pulse raced, and she instinctively turned her face slightly, shielding her baby from the flashes. She wanted to disappear into the floor, to flee from the chaos. But David's hand on her back kept her steady. "Quiet!" David's voice boomed, cutting through the storm like thunder. The crowd stilled instantly, the power in his tone impossible to ignore. He stepped forward, his tall frame commanding the attention of everyone present. "My wife," he said, his voice clear, "was humiliated and assaulted in front of dozens of passengers today. She was struck while holding our child. That is not only unprofessional, it is inhumane. And yes, it was racially motivated. There is no other explanation for the cruelty and disdain she was shown." Gasps rippled through the press. The microphones pushed closer. Cameras zoomed in on Naomi's face, capturing her wide, tear-glossed eyes and trembling lips. David continued, "This airline belongs to me. I built it from the ground up with the belief that dignity, respect, and compassion should guide everything we do. And what happened today betrays those very values. I will not stand by and allow such behavior to go unpunished." The reporters fired more questions, but Naomi's voice, quiet yet steady, suddenly rose above the chaos. "Please." The crowd hushed, leaning in. Naomi swallowed hard, forcing her trembling body to find its balance. Her voice cracked slightly, but she pressed on. "I didn't ask for this attention. I didn't want to be the center of a scandal. I'm just a woman, a mother, trying to travel safely with my baby. But today, I was reminded that silence only protects the guilty. That woman thought she could hurt me, humiliate me, and walk away without consequence. But she forgot something important. Kindness is not weakness. Dignity is not silence." The press erupted with flashes and murmurs, but Naomi lifted her chin higher. "I forgave her the moment she struck me, not because she deserves it, but because I won't let her bitterness live inside me. Still, forgiveness doesn't erase accountability. For every woman who has been silenced, for every mother who has been dismissed, for every person who has been judged by the color of their skin instead of the content of their heart, I'm standing here today to say, enough."
The terminal went silent, a stillness falling over the room as though the world itself had stopped to listen. For the first time, Naomi wasn't just a victim. She was a voice. David looked at her with awe, his heart swelling. She hadn't just survived humiliation. She had risen above it. Security escorted Clara through the terminal soon after, her hands covering her face as cameras flashed mercilessly. Reporters hurled questions at her, but she kept her head down, her earlier arrogance shattered. The once confident flight attendant now looked like a shadow of herself, her name already trending across social media with hashtags of outrage. Passengers who had been on the flight began giving their statements, their videos already circulating online. Clips of Clara's slap were being played on every news outlet, and public anger was boiling over. A reporter turned back to Naomi. "What message would you give Clara if she were listening now?" Naomi took a deep breath, adjusting her baby in her arms. She looked directly into the cameras, her gaze unwavering. "I'd tell her, I hope one day she realizes what she's done, not to me, but to herself. Because hatred is a poison, and when you spread it, it consumes you first. I don't need to punish her. She's already destroyed her own life. I just pray she learns, before it's too late, what love and compassion really mean." The crowd buzzed again, but this time the tone was different. Admiration, respect, even tears glistening in the eyes of strangers. David placed a gentle hand on Naomi's shoulder. "That's enough for today. Let's take you home." They were escorted through the terminal to a private car waiting outside. Reporters swarmed, but the security team kept them at bay. As the car doors closed, shutting out the chaos, Naomi finally let out a shaky breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Her baby stirred, opening tiny eyes and yawning as though none of the chaos had touched her. Naomi smiled weakly, pressing a kiss to her daughter's forehead. David turned to her, his eyes soft but serious. "Naomi, I've always admired your strength, but today, you were extraordinary. You didn't just defend yourself, you spoke for so many others who never had the chance." Naomi leaned her head against his shoulder, her exhaustion finally catching up to her. "I don't feel extraordinary. I just feel tired. Tired of fighting battles I never chose." David kissed the top of her head. "I know. But today wasn't just a battle. It was a turning point. You'll see." Outside the car window, billboards and news tickers already displayed headlines. "Wife of airline owner assaulted by flight attendant." Naomi Walker breaks silence. Kindness is not weakness. The world had taken notice, and life, for Naomi, David, and Clara, was never going to be the same again. The following days unraveled like a storm. News channels ran the footage on repeat, Clara raising her hand, the sharp sound of the slap echoing across the cabin, and Naomi's stunned face as passengers cried out in disbelief. Social media platforms exploded with outrage, hashtags trending worldwide. Hashtag justice for Naomi, #kindness is not weakness, #end racism in the skies. David entered the room quietly, carrying a tray with tea and toast. He set it down beside her and sat close, taking her hand into his. "You've hardly eaten all day," he said gently. Naomi gave him a tired smile. "I don't have much of an appetite. It feels strange, David. People calling me brave, calling me strong. I was terrified. I wanted to run away. If you hadn't been there, I don't know if I could have said a word." He lifted her chin, forcing her eyes to meet his. "Naomi,
Bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's standing up despite it. You were trembling, yes, but you spoke. You didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for countless others who've suffered in silence. That makes you brave, whether you feel it or not. Her eyes glistened with tears. She squeezed his hand. Sometimes I wonder if I married you, or a poet. He chuckled, brushing a tear from her cheek. You married a man who knows he doesn't deserve you, but will spend every day proving he's worthy. She leaned into him, the warmth of his embrace anchoring her. But outside their private bubble, the story kept unfolding. Clara, in desperation, attempted a public apology on live television. She stood at a podium, eyes red, voice breaking as she read from a prepared statement. Clara's face was everywhere, her name circulating in headlines she never imagined. Flight attendant fired after assaulting passenger. Caught on camera, airline scandal rocks nation. Her career crumbled overnight. The airline union refused to back her after seeing the evidence. Other attendants came forward, quietly admitting they had seen her display similar hostility toward minority passengers in the past. Lawsuits loomed. Job offers disappeared. Clara became a public villain, her arrogance now a curse she couldn't outrun. Naomi, meanwhile, found herself thrust into a spotlight she hadn't asked for. She sat in the living room of her home, baby asleep in a crib nearby, as she watched yet another replay of her press conference speech on the television. Her words, "Kindness is not weakness, dignity is not silence," had been replayed, quoted, and shared millions of times. Women's groups reached out, praising her bravery. Civil rights organizations wanted her to speak at events. Letters poured in, handwritten and digital, from strangers who felt inspired by her strength. Yet Naomi struggled to process it all. She hadn't spoken out to become a symbol. She had spoken because she was tired of being silent. David entered the room quietly, carrying a tray with tea and toast. He set it down beside her and sat close, taking her hand into his. "You've hardly eaten all day," he said gently. Naomi gave him a tired smile. "I don't have much of an appetite. It feels strange, David. People calling me brave, calling me strong. I was terrified. I wanted to run away. If you hadn't been there, I don't know if I could have said a word." He lifted her chin, forcing her eyes to meet his. "Naomi, bravery isn't the absence of fear. It's standing up despite it. You were trembling, yes, but you spoke. You didn't just speak for yourself. You spoke for countless others who've suffered in silence. That makes you brave, whether you feel it or not." Her eyes glistened with tears. She squeezed his hand. "Sometimes I wonder if I married you, or a poet." He chuckled, brushing a tear from her cheek. "You married a man who knows he doesn't deserve you, but will spend every day proving he's worthy." She leaned into him, the warmth of his embrace anchoring her. But outside their private bubble, the story kept unfolding. Clara, in desperation, attempted a public apology on live television. She stood at a podium, eyes red, voice breaking as she read from a prepared statement. "I was wrong. I let my prejudices and frustrations control me. I humiliated a passenger and disgraced myself. I beg for forgiveness from Naomi Walker, her family, and the public." But the apology fell flat. Viewers noted her lack of sincerity, her eyes darting nervously, her tone rehearsed. The public wasn't convinced. Meanwhile, David made sweeping changes in the airline.
He issued a company-wide statement. Discrimination of any kind will not be tolerated. Training programs will be restructured. Reporting channels will be strengthened. And every passenger, regardless of race, status, or background, will be treated with dignity. He made it clear. The airline would become a beacon of equality and respect, and he gave credit where it was due. It took the courage of my wife, Naomi, to remind us of what truly matters. She turned pain into purpose. The board of directors applauded him. Employees felt renewed pride. Customers, once shaken, returned with trust. But for Naomi, the most profound changes were personal. One afternoon, she walked through the park with her baby in a stroller. A young woman approached hesitantly, tears brimming in her eyes. "Excuse me, are you Naomi Walker?" Naomi nodded, unsure what to expect. The woman clasped her hands tightly. "I just want to thank you. I saw what happened on that flight. And when you spoke at the airport, it gave me courage. I've been facing harassment at my workplace for months, and I've been too scared to speak. But because of you, I filed a complaint yesterday. For the first time, I feel like my voice matters." Naomi's eyes filled with tears. She reached out, hugging the stranger. "Your voice always mattered. Don't ever forget that." The woman walked away, lighter, leaving Naomi stunned by the realization. Her story wasn't just hers anymore. It had become something bigger. Later that evening, Naomi sat in the nursery, rocking her baby gently to sleep. She whispered softly, "One day, you'll grow up in a world where people will see you for who you are, not the color of your skin. And if they don't, you'll know how to stand tall, just like Mama did." David watched from the doorway, his heart swelling with love and pride. Weeks passed, and the frenzy slowly died down. The headlines shifted, the public outrage moved on to new scandals. But Naomi remained etched in people's hearts as a symbol of quiet resilience. Clara, forgotten by the world, lived in the shadows of her mistakes. Alone, unemployed, and bitter, she scrolled through endless posts condemning her. She thought of Naomi often, not with remorse, but with envy. The woman she had tried to belittle had risen higher than she ever imagined, and Clara had only herself to blame. Naomi, on the other hand, flourished. She didn't seek fame, but she didn't hide either. She spoke at a few events, sharing her story not for attention, but to remind people of the power of dignity. Each time her voice grew steadier, her presence stronger. One evening, as the sun set behind their home, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, David took Naomi's hand. "You know," he said softly, "that day on the plane, I thought the worst thing that could happen was you being hurt. But now I see. That day changed everything. It gave the world a glimpse of the woman I've always known you to be." Naomi smiled, resting her head against his chest. "I don't want to be anyone's symbol, David. I just want to live, to love, to raise our child in peace." "And you will," he promised, kissing her forehead. "But whether you like it or not, you've already become more than you ever imagined. And I couldn't be prouder." The baby cooed softly in the background, as if echoing his words. Naomi closed her eyes, feeling a deep peace settle over her. Life had tested her, humiliated her, and tried to break her. But she had endured. And in her endurance, she had found not just strength, but purpose.
The slap meant to silence her had instead awakened a voice the world would never forget. And with David by her side, love steady and unshakable, Naomi knew she could face whatever storms the future might bring. Because kindness was not weakness. Dignity was not silence. And her story was only just beginning.